start at the top, I guess? Is this Ron? With the rights drawn to a close, the slug market's revenues fell precipitously, and Falcon Ron was forced to liquidate his assets and close up shop. Yet, as is sometimes the case with those of an entrepreneurial leaning, this time of hardship led to an epiphany, or at least a sudden change of fortune. One day, Falcon Ron had a run-in with a messenger imp bearing news from the other side. Ron gave to it one of his remaining trinkets, which could not be sold. The following week, the messenger imp returned to him bearing a tidy sum of wealth in newly minted coinage from the Sara Union. Our nation formed in 839 AS after the fall of the Commonwealth. One day, we all may stand shoulder to shoulder with a common cause. Falcon Ron caught a long-term deal with the messenger imp then and there. Though his trade remained a gray area from a legal standpoint, in the Saran Union, the newfound fame of the downside caused Falcon Ron's goods to explode in popularity. He later signed an elaborate agreement with Big Bertrude's and found a distribution partner on the other side through rookie Greentail, whose own business had expanded. Oh, I wonder if they open up contact and trade and everything. Because they were saying you could send goods down the river. So maybe that's legal now. And then they send messenger imps back and forth. So they still are in contact with everybody in the downside. They've made that better. Especially in the Saran Union, Falcon Ron's goods are still known for their superior quality, though he assumes no liability for any side effects. Okay. Okay, so his trade makes it up there. Awesome. You too. After the cycle of the rites ceased turning, the lone minstrel bade the remaining Nightwings take the black wagon and seek their fortunes elsewhere in the downside. Their parting was heartfelt but brief. He remained there at the summit of Mount Adalia with Celeste, where the two of them would chronicle the final outcome of the cycle. Neither Tarig nor Celeste were ever seen again. We know all this now through song attributed to them. Please tell me you just went off into retirement. Some claim these songs originated in the taverns of the Saran Union and merely were imbued with the weight of folklore. However, exiles liberated from the downside corroborated each other's claims at having met this duo that presided over the liberation rites. Another folktale suggests these minstrels were heralds of the scribes. Having fulfilled their obligations, they departed the world we know and rejoined their patrons. One of their famous songs describes another simpler outcome. The two gave up their duties to the rites in favor of a life they could share together. Absolutely. In any case, they're likely to remain the subject of such verses and such songs, for it was they who watched over the rites and ushered in our times. When the cycle of the rites ceased turning, Volfred Sandalwood turned toward the starless sky and closed his eyes and prayed. It was all that he could do at the stage of his plan. He aspired to assemble with liberated exiles representing each of the 8 largest ethnic groups composing the population of the Commonwealth. They would stand together as a vision of the 8 scribes returned, inspiring the masses to embrace an older set of values from before the Commonwealth had tightened its grip. With the rites ending sooner than expected, this ideal scenario became impossible. Sandalwood's own freedom, for instance, was now forfeit, yet the plan did have contingencies. Word reached him on the night of the scribe's return. Several of his fellow liberated Nightwings stood together and their voices echoed through the streets. It was vital to Sandalwood that his stand against the Commonwealth be peaceful in its nature, but this proved to be unattainable, especially after the High Wing remnants appeared. There was speculation that their well-timed assault may not have happened by coincidence, though Sandalwood denied any involvement and regretted the bloodshed. Nevertheless, the main thrust of the plan had been achieved. Sandalwood kept busy after that as much as possible, providing counsel from afar to those who would be at the forefront of the birth of the Sara nation. Of course, being stranded in the downside meant there was only so much he could do. Resting assured that the future of the nation was in capable hands, he returned his attention to the remaining exiles of the downside. They might never return to that new nation, but at least they could experience its triumphs and its struggles in some vicarious way. So he took to his old work, writing and printing. As literacy began to spread again throughout the Saharian nation, so too did exiles of the downside take to it. For his part, Sandalwood helped teach as many as he could. More than that, he provided the material to read, a semi-annual report about the latest events, both from the Saharan Union and the downside. This periodical gave many exiles something to look forward to. One of his allies in all this was the imp Tizzo, with whom he traveled all across the downside. Sandalwood often cited Tizzo as the wellspring of his own enthusiasm for a brighter future. Such was the creature's spirit. He enjoyed exchanging letters with the reader of the Nightwings, who kept him well abreast of how their other comrades in the fledgling nation fared. It is said that at some point he made amends with his one-time friend Orlick, with whom he clashed during their days as exiles. After that, they seldom traveled separately. Yay! As Volfred, Sandalwood gained more fame throughout this land for all his sacrifices and his contributions. It is said he remained steadfast about two things. The first was that the cause itself ought to remain in focus. The freedom that the people had achieved, it was a gift to be cherished, a set of values that needed to be nurtured. The second point he made was that he himself had little to do with the outcome. He would often praise the exiles of the Nightwings who had stood with him, each in turn, by name. He never forgot any of them. One day, to commemorate his birthday, the people of the Saharan Union unveiled a monument depicting him and the Nightwings as imagined in their prime. While Sandalwood did not learn of it until much later, it is said he was moved to tears then by the gesture. It is since ensured that those of us with memories more fallible than that of Sandalwood likewise remember the achievements of his fellow former exiles and our cause. Several exiles of the Nightwings cared more for the plan of Sandalwood than to return home from the downside. The crone called Big Bertrude was a prime example. She had found a suitable environment to live within the dismal region known as Flagging Hands. There she'd built up a thriving place of business known to many exiles in the land. With the rites having ended, she returned to her preoccupations, working away almost as though nothing had happened. When one gets to be more than 400 years of age, perhaps then even monumental events such as the culmination of the rites or the collapse of the Commonwealth are seen as trifling matters. Much of her effort was doubtless due to the influence of Sandalwood, someone whom she had admired now for decades. He had made it clear that he could not requite her feelings for him, but what could have been a hurtful dismissal led only to a deeper understanding between them. She maintained an unlikely kinship with the harp, Pamitha Thren, whom she had known during their time together on the Nightwings. They each had different strategies for dealing with life's day-to-day annoyances, a subject that they both found vital if not fascinating to no end. By and large, Bertrude kept focus on her work, whether casting small enchantments or imbuing talismans. The work brought her a sense of purpose, she would say. In the Commonwealth, such services were strictly forbidden, but in the downside there was a real need for simple luxuries, which the competing slug market could not always provide. Thus did Big Bertrude continue to live up to her name, and the tales of her days with the Nightwings made her that much more the living legend. Pamitha. After the rites ended, Pamitha Thren parted ways with the other Nightwings, stating that she needed time alone. She reappeared sometime after the fall of the Commonwealth, though she expressed mild surprise at the news. She claimed to have no knowledge of what went on, including what role the Highwing remnants had in the events that reshaped the world on the other side. For her part, Pamitha feigned little interest, making the point that they were stuck, and what happened elsewhere had little to do with them now. Someone with whom she kept In contact was the bog dweller called Big Bertrude. They would discuss all sorts of matters long into the night and sometimes hunt together too. One day while traveling to Black Basin, Pamitha ran into her blood sister Tamatha for the first time since the conclusion of the rites. Their reunion was not as amicable as Pamitha might have hoped, and Tamatha, still resentful of their history together, turned violent. Pamitha would later brush aside the incident, though always had an injury to show for it. Yet from that point on, the blood sisters were back on speaking terms, at least for the most part. Having long since felt as though she had no home to call her own, Pamitha continued traveling about the downside. As the tempest swept across the land, changing its features, she found in it a sublime beauty, and in the starless nights, she could still see just fine. She said such travels tended to remind her of when she was younger and could fly unfettered. Aww. After her liberation, Jodrell soon became an icon of the movement that led to the collapse of the Commonwealth and the rise of the Sarin Union. Her military prowess and experience led to key victories in clashes against Commonwealth loyalists. Each time she was able to subdue the opposition, avoiding lethal force. In the uncertain times that followed, Jodrell's seasoned experience often came into play both in matters of security and of state. For instance, she conscripted and trained a team of volunteers in public safety. The community did not know what to make of such a cordial bunch at first, but soon came to value their service. They have stood for the people ever since, and we celebrate their founding day each year. She remained close with Hedwin all through his experience, and they supported each other through their struggles many, many times. She kept an eye on Faye, who nonetheless demonstrated a surprising knack to get by on her own, though Jodrell was always willing to provide assistance just in case. She continued training on her own, a regimen that grew stricter with each passing year. There were those who sought to train with her, and she sometimes obliged. There remained one other constant in her life. She would always remember her days among the Nightwings with fondness, for the most part. After rookie Greentail earned back his freedom, he returned to a lavish welcome ceremony in the Commonwealth, as was the tendency for liberated exiles. It was everything he could have hoped for, and soon he was well off, surrounded by luxury, and choosing between various exciting opportunities. However, he must have given in to his better judgment, as he did end up siding with Valfred Sandalwood's revolutionary forces as he promised. On the night of the scribe's return, Greentail kept busy barking orders to Valfred's agents as the situation grew tenser. He took rather well to leadership. So the night of the scribe's return is all of them. When dawn finally came, and it became clear that the Commonwealth that everybody knew would be no more, he realized many new opportunities awaited. He began quite a lucrative career for himself, manufacturing and selling replica merchandise inspired by the downside. His main struggle was to meet demand. An aspect of his conscience cautioned him against making light of such a thing, but the money was too good, and soon his family was as well off as he always said. He also kept in close touch with Gilman, ever the perfect practice partner. They would train together often, taking care to stay in tip-top shape as much as possible throughout the years. Greentail always did his best to keep in touch with all his many friends and knew that he owed his fortunes to them. He made a special point of staying close with the group of friends he came to know so well during his time with the Nightwings, wherever they were. They shared a special understanding that put even Greentail at a loss for words sometimes. The Commonwealth had never provided a sense of home for the one they had called Faye the Fair, so she was surprised on her return that she was so well treated. She felt uneasy about it, and besides, she knew that she would do her best to fulfill the pledge she had made to her friends. Even she could not have expected the impact she would have on the events that followed, which gave rise to our Sarin Union. Faye stood with the others on the night of the scribe's return. She did not take up arms, but spoke of the scribes with conviction and sincerity. Others were so caught off guard that it helped quell the danger of the situation. After the fall of the Commonwealth, there was a renewed interest in the legend of the 8 scribes and many new interpretations of their histories and teachings. Faye found herself at the center of all this. Her way of speaking continued to compel a growing audience. She swayed many people from their astralist beliefs. Soon, the 8th world, which had lost favor with the people during the reign of the Commonwealth, sought her out and asked her to formally join, and she did right away. A theocratic sect believing that the 8 scribes were more than mortal and their words divine. Through it all, she would wonder how her little friend Tizzo had fared. While they were divided now by a great distance, he always remained in her heart. She cited her relationship with Jodrell as the single most important in her life. Jodrell would always provide for her a circumspect perspective and the wisdom of experience. Whenever she felt genuine doubt, which was not very often, she sought out the reader of the Nightwings. If there was anyone whom she trusted as much as the scribes, it was them. One day she encountered one of her former adversaries, the one called Almer Oldheart, who had served the Fate. She remembered him much more than he did her, though only at first. Their shared experience in the Rites and their different points of view about the scribes formed the basis of what grew to be a long-lasting relationship. Faye always was devoted to her faith, but more so to her friends. Many people in the Saran Union cited that her gentle manner and unwavering conviction helped them brave the changing times with courage and grace. After his liberation, Hedwin was instrumental in the events leading to the fall of the Commonwealth and was vital to the outcome of the plan. He was the one who led the raid on the stronghold where the Archjustice Androlebs IX was holed up when the fighting grew fierce. With him, then and thereafter, was one of the winged harps of the High Wing remnants, later identified as Fikani Shang. Their bond was vital to the peace that followed. Yay! In all his days as a leader in the Saran Union, Hedwin often confided in his friend Jodrell. Despite her intense manner, there was no one whom he trusted more in times when circumspection was required. Hedwin would often think back about the vow he made at the beginning of his quest for freedom. Although he cherished all the friendships he made, he had pledged to Jodrell, Rookie Greentail, and the reader of the Nightwings that they might all be free again together. His promise had come to pass, though he always knew that this was not his own doing. He was always deeply grateful to the other 3, his closest friends. While the others who stood with the Nightwings were not all able to remain in contact thus, Hedwin thought of each of them often, and so in turn did they often think of him. When the worm Gilman returned to the Commonwealth, he believed that he had regained something even more important than his freedom, his honor. Gilman relinquished his knighthood and declined an opportunity to serve as captain on the Blood Border. He was not interested in fighting any longer. Yet, as is sometimes the case with those such as he, a circumstance soon came about in which there came a need for him to once again make use of his military training. He fought that night of the scribe's return. He fought with all his might. He faced other worm knights. He cared only for the cause. When the matter was at last put to rest, then Gilman truly knew his time as a knight had ended. He declared to all those in earshot that he would never fight again. Unless, of course, there arose some other extraordinary set of circumstance, again requiring him to fight, but he certainly hoped not. He still trained regularly just in case, especially with his fleet-footed friend Rookie Greentail. He was always grateful for the counsel of the reader and would regale them over and over about the time they squashed the spawn of unfathomed plurns. By that point, he had long forgotten about his days under the leadership of Sir Deluge, his former commander. Breaking free of his abusive relationship was his first step toward gaining a bit of self-respect. Gilman never did return to his homeland of the Sea Dominion and was content to lead a monastic life on a small residence in the hills. It was just high up enough to make him keep striving to conquer his fear of heights. Other than that, an intense daily training regimen and the occasional visit from an old companion was more than enough to keep him optimistic and engaged. He knew by then that honor was not something to be won, but a contract with oneself to be renewed each day. Sandra. After the cycle of the rites ceased turning, records of what happened to the Black Wagon of the Nightwings became inconclusive and contradictory. Some accounts suggest that the exiles of the Nightwings who remained in the downside continued to make use of the Black Wagon as their place of shelter and their means of travel. However, there's no record of what happened to the wagon's contents, such as the Book of Rites or the Beyonder Crystal, said to be haunted by the apparition Sandra the Unseen. One possibility is that when the lone minstrel took his leave, he took the Beyonder Crystal with him, for he was thus obliged. By this line of reasoning, however, the Black Wagon itself should have been taken also. Others remain skeptical that the Beyonder Crystal ever existed, or rather that the visions that it granted were anything other than the result of an active imagination or a fever dream. The bog dwellers of the southern bogs offer still another explanation, for they are familiar with binding enchantments. If there existed such an object in which the Sisters of the Arch had been expelled for more than 800 years, then the enchantment could have expired along with the light of the stars. What this would have meant for Sandra and the Beyonders is still difficult to say for certain, other than it may have meant that they were finally released. Nevertheless, the fates of Sandra and the Beyonder Crystal remain unknown. Yet those exiles of the Nightwings who claimed to have seen this apparition all spoke of her with degrees of reverence, or perhaps a little fear. Can you believe this, reader? Honestly. Sandra has appeared before you, as well you can see. They are so far from the mark with all this nonsense. I want to laugh. In fact, here goes. She laughs. She's referring to the account of her. You sense she does not care for it. Well, let them gossip all they like. I merely wish that they would mention you at least in passing, when next they are at it, though they shall never know the half of it, shall they? Sandra seems irritated by the incomplete account of what happened to her. Reassure her. The account was relatively flattering despite a lack of detail. It could have been worse. Humor her. Perhaps making some light of the situation will make Sandra feel better. Remain silent. Reassure her. You suggest to Sandra that the account of what occurred to her was really not that bad, and that you liked aspects of it. You're much too diplomatic, you know that? You can tell she is unswayed, and yet her grin remains intact. She appreciates the gesture. I don't know what was so unflattering. Anyway, let us keep going, lovely reader. We know the truth of it. That is all that matters. She fades into the Beyonder Crystal for now, and you tuck it away safe. Oh, that was sweet. Once the rites had ended, the imp Tizzo had a job to do, quite unlike most exiles trapped forever in the downside. The lone minstrel asked that he watch over the Black Wagon, which the Nightwings had used extensively for travel and for shelter all throughout their quest. Tizzo obliged, for he knew that wagon, as well as its drive imp inhabitants, perhaps better than anyone. What became of the wagon exactly was never verified, as evidence of Tizzo's thorough work. After that, he liked to while away his days with any of his friends, or else with fellow imps. Sandalwood sometimes called for his assistance, and Tizzo was always happy to oblige. The two would often reminisce about their times with the lone minstrel. Tizzo often missed his interactions with the reader of the Nightwings. They had quickly built quite a rapport back in the downside. Indeed, Tizzo would often express wistful gratitude for all his time with the Nightwings and their many adventures throughout the land that was always his home. Other than that, Tizzo would sometimes help interpret for messenger imps relaying news to and from the Sarin Union. Despite having gained significant celebrity abroad, he never let it go to his head, and he would go fishing in the Sea of Solace at every chance he got. Orlick. After the shimmer pool closed for what would be the last time, Orlick looked around him in the flickering light of the Nightwing's still burning pyre. He then turned toward the fall of Cilium and looked up toward the black, starless sky. After standing thus for some time, he averted his gaze and walked away without a word. Orlick had relinquished his freedom of his own free will. Perhaps, in realizing this, he saw no reason to remain there on the sacred mountain. For many moons, he wandered the downside alone. Eventually, however, he would reunite with the exiles he stood with as the true Nightwings, for they each cared for him. The one he had called the Shadow of the False Nightwings was someone whom he thought about at times. He wondered if this reader had had an influence over the Commonwealth's fall. News must have reached him eventually about the outcome of Sandalwood's plan. One day, he appeared before his former companion. While they kept private the details of the conversation that took place, it must have been enough to rebuild the bonds of friendship between the two of them. They were often seen together after that. Yay! Orlick later reunited with Tizzo, who joined his travels. It was much like olden times in that regard, and the imp always enjoyed his company. Still, in the Sarin Union, no one remembered the former chief physician who had fallen into exile decades prior. No one knew just how close he came to altering the outcome of the final liberation rite, and thus, perhaps, to altering the course of history. Today, however, this is not the case. Accounts from other exiles of the downside have ensured that Orlick's place in the events that shaped our world are known, and shall be known. Aww. This guy. Once it became clear to Ignarius that the rites were drawing to a close, he knew that it was time for him and the Tempers to call it quits. But first, he and the Tempers decided to celebrate, and that they did for many, many nights. The revelry did eventually subside. The exiles parted amicably and went their separate ways. He roamed the downside then, searching for some meaning in his life, sometimes taking odd jobs requiring his brute strength. He never remained alone for very long and took on many lovers in his time. However, he sometimes thought about the one he had called Curly Horns and what became of her. Though his glory days as the most powerful conductor of the rites had long since passed, he always enjoyed the fearsome reputation he had cultivated at that time. When Manny Tinderstaff realized the rites had ended and that he no longer could return to the Commonwealth through his ancient means, he was outraged. He cursed the scribes, spewing forth such a slew of blasphemy as to be very unbecoming of one of his high status and bearing. Then at last he calmed himself. He found all his energies on attempting to find another means of homecoming. He maintained regular contact with his wealthy family on the other side via messenger imp, and used their vast resources to explore other means of escape. He tried using an elaborate pulley system. He attempted to retrofit a flying black wagon with superior propulsion. He tried an imp raft, a hot air balloon, even prayer. Nothing worked. There was only one way to escape the downside, and now it was gone. The Tinderstaff bankrupted his family in these vain attempts. At last, such was his shame that he retreated to the teeming woods of the Black Basin to Cinderroot. There he yet wallows, complaining to his comrades of the chastity who still put up with him, either about his own misfortune or the latest news from the other side. Oh, damn. Tamatha. Throughout her exile, Tamitha then was motivated by a single goal, to return to the Commonwealth and exact revenge on her ancient enemies. When she realized the rites had ended and that she would never see her home mountain again, she nonetheless remained determined to aid her people however possible. She gathered certain information pertaining to the intention of the Nightwings, who had formed a pact to regroup on the other side after their liberation. Oh. Other such reports exposed certain weaknesses in the Commonwealth defenses and revealed to the Highwing remnants the opportunity for a risky but potentially impactful strike. Though Tamatha could not participate in the assault, she nonetheless contributed to its success. She later learned her sisters of the Highwing remnants called out her name as a battle cry as they swooped down upon their enemies. Soon after the fall of the Commonwealth, Tamatha encountered her blood sister Pamitha, come to pay her a visit. Pamitha had hoped their people's victory on the other side would be a cause for reconciliation. Tamatha was skeptical of her intentions, however, and lashed out at her. Pamitha made no attempt to elude the attack and was struck full on. This cost Pamitha the use of her right wing, yet after she recovered, she shrugged the incident aside and said maybe they could call it even now. From that point on, the Blood Sisters kept a formal distance, but were cordial with each other. Aww. Knowing that the conflict on the other side had ended, Tamatha retreated to the crags of Black Basin and grew ever more distant. Those closest to her surmised that her inability to reconcile with her blood sister was at the heart of this, though for her part, Tamatha never once admitted to any such weakness. Aw, girl, go make up. Barker Ash Paws never had much interest in returning to the Commonwealth, for he always found its bylaws to be stifling, so when the rites ended he did not care at first. He soon grew very bored. The rites had given his life a certain sense of structure he'd always needed. He missed the raw anticipation of it all. He decided to continue conducting the rites for the thrill of it. He bent some of the rules and replaced some of the objects, but it was close enough. His packmates, the dissidents, proved more than happy to participate, and thus they ran against each other back in Yormler Valley. Gradually, other exiles familiar with the rites, as well as those who'd not heard of it at all, started to take an interest. They ended up giving Barker Ash Paws some healthy competition. His old feud with Rookie Greentail ceased meaning anything to him, and he forgot all about it amid his new pursuits. Ultimately, even Barker Ash Paws, who had led such a directionless existence to that point, found something of a calling through the rites. Nonetheless, he took the rites less seriously than any other exile of his time, or more was oft debated by those who watched him work. I mean, hey, whatever makes you happy, dude. All his life, Sir Deluge had fled from one danger only to find himself facing another. He had escaped the war-torn waters of the Sea Dominion. He had escaped the blood border of the Commonwealth, and now he had escaped the rites. After the rites had ended, many exiles wrapped up in the ancient test were crestfallen, as their last chances to return to their homes vanished along with the stars above. But Deluge did not mind, for this outcome meant that at least there was no burden of responsibility weighing down on him. While most of his fellow exiles of the Pyre hearts yet longed for the waters of the Sea Dominion, driven as ever by their impulses towards conflict, Deluge settled down. With him remained one of his companions, one Lady Seagrass, who had taken a liking to him for some reason. Reportedly, they disappeared into the waters of Worm Gulf, which may begin to explain the significant increase in worm population observed in the vicinity. Oh, hey. After his liberation, Almer Oldheart was separated from his father Dalbert, who had cast his son into the Shimmer Pool in his own place. The elderly Dalbert Oldheart, having achieved his goal of earning back his son's freedom, retired from the rites. By the time the cycle of the rites had reached its end, Dalbert's time had come as well. Almer did not learn of this until much later. Surely Dalbert would have wanted it that way. Would that he could have seen his son during this vital time. On the night of the scribe's return, Almer became inspired by what he saw happening all around him. He reminded him of his father's words and beliefs, and soon Almer rejoined the fight, protecting others bodily as the situation escalated. By dawn's first light, it was over. Almer was exhausted, but the cause had prevailed. From that point forward, he worked tirelessly to continue his father's work as a historian and curator of Kur culture. He ended up providing an invaluable perspective during the formation of the Saurian Union as someone strongly connected to both Kurs and to his own kind. Oh, so you're not a Kur, you're a human. I thought because of his nose, but he just painted it. He found that the Old Heart lineage carried a great deal of respect and was able to bridge many cultural issues between his people as they transitioned into modern times. One day he was to have a meeting with a dignitary of the Eighth Word, which had grown in popularity since the birth of the Saurian Union. Almer was stunned to find that this dignitary was none other than the one he knew as Faye from their days spent in exile. Faye was overjoyed to see him, though Almer was unable to bring himself to understand why. Eventually, of course, he did, and they since have ensured the Old Heart clan shall carry on in this new age. Not a day went by that Almer Oldheart did not think about his father and give thanks to him and speak to him at morning and at night. Would that the stars yet shone for Shirley Dalberts would be there among them, smiling down at his son and watching over him and his kin. Oh, they both, okay. After the cycle of the rites had ceased, witch Milde returned to the Flagging Hands region, where she sealed herself within the pit of Milde. There, even her fellow exiles of the Withdrawn allegedly grew unnerved after a time and left her to her vile work. Sometime later, the pit of Milde erupted into flame. So intense was the conflagration that it could be seen all the way from Yormer Valley. Arson was suspected, though the cause was never verified, and many bog dwellers in the region were forced to flee. A tempest blowing from the north finally quenched the flames. When at last the ashes settled and the grounds had cooled, the site of the fire was scarred beyond recognition. No trace of witch Milde could be found. As for the contents of the pit of Milde, which notably included a profane object thought to be the remains of Yishlak, all of it were gone as well. Back in the Saren Union, Udmilde's repeated threats of the return of Yishlak were thoroughly investigated, and no credence was found to any of her claims. So, what the heck? She blew herself up? After the final liberation rite, Lendl refused to believe the rites had truly ended. He would sit through night after consecutive night, staring into the blackness of the sky, awaiting any kind of sign that he might again gain another chance at freedom. No such sign ever came. His fellow accusers started to express concern for him. Survival had become their top priority once liberty had slipped from their grasp. But Lendl dismissed them as weak fools. He insisted, rather forcibly, that any evening now the stars would shine for him again and mark the way toward his inevitable freedom. He was, of course, mistaken. The others in his triumvirate were left with little choice but to abandon him. After that, the exile known as Lendl the Liar was never seen again. However, there have been sightings of a beraggled demon who wanders the downside and bears Lendl's cruel countenance, suggesting he yet lives. Oh. There's one more account which warrants mention. The Nightwings conducted the rites under the guidance of a reader. Little is known of them. However, some accounts of them begin to paint a picture. We know they were of common birth. Always directionless and prone to misremembering at times. The journey to the downside left them close to death. But it was then that the Nightwings found them. They brought them from the brink. They showed them the path. They pressed onward with the others. They had made a vow to help their friends be free. Thus did the cycle of the rites commence its final turns. When the final rites arrived, the reader's freedom was at stake. That freedom they indeed achieved ere the morning's light. From that point on, accounts of them diverge. It is said the voice, which troubled them, they never heard again, thank frickin' goodness. Some say they opted to retreat from public life. Though whether that is true, only they know. Someday perhaps the reader's own star shall emerge. Then it shall pierce the dark of night in all its brilliant glory. Until such a time, and ever after, all of us give thanks.
Their journey began on a barren waste where the reader arrived, afraid and alone. When they arrived, the book of rites awakened the
that Hedwin?
in our brain till the end. We sing of the last of the night wings who, having broken the cycle,
There's Jodrell.
on in song. Hedwin prevailed.
Yeah.
Strode the path that his heart laid
Is that
before him.
Faye in the back? With cards?
He has found his way home. Captain Jodrell, mother to many a foundling.
And then Rookie.
She has found her way home. Rookie Greentail has proved his worth and returned to his family.
So I know this song is meant to change depending on your choices and, you know, who's free and who's not.
Follow the stars, bound together, strands in a braid till the end. The moon-touched girl hears the scribes in the world all around her.
Is that some random person in the back just surprised? Is that Hedwin? Because she has Tizzo with her. Aww. They're catching fish together.
Ever faithful to the cause of the night wings, he remained to the end.
Sir Gilman the bold, ever in his quest, finding honor and glory, he has found his way home. Pamitha Thane, born on guilty wings, ever seeking forgiveness.
Is that
She
Pamitha?
remains till the end.
Oh, those are her wings. And then Rookie and Hedwin being seasick.
Bound together, strands in a braid till the end. Bound together, spirits tender, strands unbroken, spines
The great mastermind, Volfred Sandalwood, saw his plans turn to action. He remained till the end.
The bog dweller Bertrude kept their foes at bay with her finest enchantments. She remained till the end. The reader at last made the night wings whole and ascended to freedom.
So usually I try to find trivia for these credit scenes, and I can't. Supergiant Games would like to thank our families and friends whose support was essential to making this game.
Strands in a braid till the end. They follow the stars, bound together. Strands in a braid till the end.
I think that's meant to be the reader in the middle.
The end, as we bid farewell and return to the stars, we shall find our way home.
Well, that was absolutely a worthwhile experience, and I thoroughly enjoyed that immensely. This was great. What are we looking at? Oh, this is the new library of the new nation? What's out the window? What is that? I'm almost concerned that I'm missing something because I don't know what I'm looking at out the window. All right, I guess we're done. This is the end. We have finished the game. Thank you. Thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed. I certainly did. And I hope that you are all staying safe and that you are having a wonderful day. And thank you so much for watching.